Hello and welcome everyone to our weekly session titled our latest in Bitcoin tech, where we put the Bitcoin Optech newsletter. And this week we will be covering newsletter number 311, published on 12th of July 2024. Generally, the first section of the news article of the newsletter is obviously the news section, which is generally the most uh, lengthy one and occupies the main chunk of the newsletter. But strangely, this week we do not have anything in the news section. As they have mentioned, no significant news this week was found in any of our sources. For fun, you may want to check out a recent interesting transaction. So nothing in the news section. We might even be able to wind up before an hour if there is nothing interesting in the audio of discussing. We just have a Bitcoin Core PR review that happened recently. Okay, so we have a summary of that review club. We can go through it. There are two release candidates, which like there's nothing to cover in them. And we two code and notification changes. So like a very succinct and a very small newsletter this week. We probably try and spend a time with this review club and see what testnet 4 is, how it differs from testnet 3, time, see certain mechanism of testnet 3 that would lead to storm blocks, discussing the time warp attack and how it is mitigated in testnets. Review club will, but other than that, I don't have any worth covering that data. So let's dig into the Bitcoin Core PR review club. Okay. In this monthly section, we summarize the recent Bitcoin Core PR review club meeting, highlighting some of the important questions and answers. Click on the question below to see a summary of the answer from the meeting. I'll read the context first. Just testnet 4, including proof of work difficulty adjustment fix with a PR by IBM chart and introduces testnet 4. Test network to replace testnet 3 and simultaneously fixes long-standing difficulty adjustment and time warp bugs. It is the result of a test and is accompanied by the proposal. IBM chart, if I'm not wrong, I believe is the quote-unquote founder of Nostr. He's the one who worked in Nostr for the first time. He's the one who came up with Nostr. I believe it's him. Okay. So he's also a core contributor.
Is it Fiat Jeff? What I have heard is that Fiat Jeff
Yes,
was.
yes. I got confused. Correct.
Oh,
You
got
can
it.
start with F
Nice.
and like it's F and J the initial, so I got confused. Right, correct. So yeah, I think I would start. Okay, so what should we start with first?
Is it for me or is Faisal's voice breaking up?
Yeah, there's a little bit of an issue. I think it's from a distance or there's some network issue.
Oh, okay. One more second. Is it better now?
Yes, definitely better.
Oh yeah, I forgot to bring the mic near my face. It was pointing in the other direction. All right, thanks.
Clear.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So this is a summary of the Bitcoin Core PR Review Club. Okay. So just like we have one at Bitshala, this is like the parent of all the PR review clubs, right? You might have seen a lot of communities conduct their own PR review clubs. This is the parent one. This is how it all begins. Like the Bitcoin Core contributors, people who actually write code on Bitcoin Core, they are the ones who conduct this Bitcoin Core PR review club. I think it happens either bi-weekly or tri-weekly or once in a month. So this is like the parent session of all the PR review clubs. Okay. So yeah, let's just read through it once. Okay, and then we'll try and click on the relevant links. So basically this PR review club talks about some changes that have been made to testnet 4. I'm sure most of y'all are aware of what testnet is, and most of y'all are aware of testnet 4. So basically testnet is a simulation of the mainnet. Okay, as the name suggests, there's a mainnet of the Bitcoin network and there's a testnet. Okay, so like developers generally use testnet for testing their applications, their clients, the changes that they intend to implement on the mainnet. They first tested on the testnet before doing that on the mainnet. Okay, and testnet also has a mining difficulty. Okay, there's like you have to mine blocks, unlike signet where you don't mine blocks. On signet you don't mine blocks. On testnet and on mainnet you mine blocks. The difference is that the difficulty is much lower in testnet as compared to the mainnet, and you can mine blocks using a CPU, which is almost impossible on the mainnet. All right, to make mining easier for developers, because not all developers obviously have access to an ASIC. So the to maintain and ensure that the difficulty level is low, the mining is done on CPUs or on GPUs, and to also ensure that testnet coins do not carry any value, because testnet coins should be easily available and accessible to developers for testing purpose. So to ensure that testnet coins do not contain any value, testnet blocks are mined on CPU and GPU. And this is the fourth version of the testnet. Okay, so like we had testnet 1, and then we started again from the genesis block. We abandoned that testnet, started from the genesis block. Testnet 2, abandoned that, started from the genesis block. Testnet 3, and now it's testnet 4. So for different reasons, testnet, if developers feel that we need a new testnet, we migrate to a new testnet. Okay, the reason could be that people have started mining on the testnet using ASICs, or the reason could be that people have started to value coins on a certain version of the testnet. So if any attribute, any essential attribute, any essential core principle of the testnet is getting violated, generally the developers decide to move to a new testnet. So currently we have moved to testnet 4. Okay, so this is recommended reading for whoever gets time later on. We'll try and read 1 or 2 of it if time permits. In fact, we will. Okay, so please also try reading BIP. Read the BIP PR, and if possible review it in tandem with the PR. The BIP and the PR should be in sync with each other, and ideally BIP should be a clear description of the key parts of the PR. Testnet reset discussion on the mailing list, a helpful deep dive on the Blockstorm bug by Jameson Lop, a great explanation of the time warp attack on a Bitcoin Stack Exchange by David Harding. All right, so Bitcoin Core supports 3 test networks out of the box: Regtest, Testnet, and Signet. All right, other than the mainnet, obviously. There also exists some custom Signet like MutinyNet. At this point, the current testnet has been running for 12 years. So testnet 3 has been running for 12 years. Okay, we had testnet 1, then we had testnet 2, which means that the first 2 testnets lasted for around 3 years, because Bitcoin has been there since 2009 and it's 2024. So Bitcoin has been there for roughly 15 years, which implies that the testnet 1 and testnet 2 cumulatively lasted for around 3 years, and testnet 1 and 2, sorry, cumulatively lasted for around 3 years. And for the past 12 years, we've had testnet 3, and eventually we've now moved on to testnet 4. However, the current testnet is actually testnet 3. It was introduced in PR number such and such 1392. Documentation on how exactly testnet 1 and 2 broke is not available, but it appears that they fell victim to high fluctuation in mining power. Remember that around this time, the first ASIC miners entered the market, while testnet was probably still mostly mined by CPUs and maybe the occasional GPU. Testnet 3 features a proof of work exception rule known as the 20-min exception. This rule was designed to prevent the chain from getting stuck again due to hash power fluctuation. However, a bug in this exception leads to so-called block storms, large numbers of blocks being mined in quick succession. This is the main reason testnet 3 is so far ahead of mainnet, even though it started much later. The bug was recently exploited on purpose for an extended period of time to highlight this issue. Testnet 4 still includes the 20-min exception, but adds a mitigation for the Blockstorm issue. The pull request also includes a fix for the time warp attack, an attack that is still possible on mainnet today. A fix for this was proposed as part of the Great Consensus cleanup, but failed to get the necessary support as a soft fork so far. All right, so basically there was an issue with testnet 3. What was that issue? That issue was due to a 20-minute exception. Okay, a 20-minute exception. What that issue exactly is, we'll try and dig deeper into it. Okay, but there was an issue called 20-minute exception, okay, due to which there were block storms possible. What's a block storm? Like lots and lots of blocks being mined in a quick succession is known as a block storm. Okay, ideally you expect that a block on the testnet will be mined on 10 minutes, just like a block on the mainnet is mined every 10 minutes, so that testnet can emulate the behavior of mainnet, right? The purpose of having a testnet is that testnet should emulate the behavior of the mainnet. If on an average a block is mined on the mainnet every 10 minutes, then every feature that you intend to implement on the mainnet and you're testing it on the testnet, it's imperative that testnet also behaves like the mainnet. So ideally, you want a block on an average to be mined on the testnet every 10 minutes. All right. And there is an exception to this rule, which is known as the 20-minute exception rule. We'll look into what that is. Okay. Now, this rule was being exploited by some people. We will read this article, which is not very long, which will help us understand a lot of things in context to this PR. Okay, so this article is written by Jameson Law. Right, okay. Let us start from here. I'll just zoom in. In some cases, people notice that testnet APIs and block explorers get stuck with their last block found hours ago, or may report an unusually high number of blocks found with a very high orphan rate. The root cause is almost always the same: abnormal network activity due to one of testnet's unique attributes. Background: mining difficulty retargeting. Bitcoin miners create blocks by solving via brute force the proof of work for their proposed block. The difficulty for the entire of miners to solve a block is regularly adjusted in order to target a block interval averaging every 10 minutes, right? So after 2016 blocks, just like on the main net, there is a difficulty adjustment which ensures that on an average a block is mined every 10 minutes. The same difficulty adjustment procedures followed on the testnet as well. So after every 2016 blocks, there is a difficulty adjustment that is happening on the testnet to ensure that on an average, a block is found every 10 minutes. But not every block interval is exactly 10 minutes. It follows a statistical process known as a Poisson process, where random events happen with same probability in each time interval. The result is that about 10% of the time, once every couple hours, you will have to wait over 20 minutes for the next block, while about 0.3% of the time, once every few days, you'll have to wait over an hour for a block. This isn't great for developers who need their transactions confirmed in a timely manner for testing, right? So ideally, you want a block to be mined every 10 minutes, right? That's ideal for testing purpose. And for those who would like to read later on, I would advise you to explore this. What's the Poisson process? Okay, it's very like a fun trivia kind of a thing that you'll figure out, like how do you estimate the expected time of the next Bitcoin block that is to be mined. All right, it's a very interesting process. So it's not 10 minutes relatively. It's an arbitrary figure. It's like a really fun discovery. When I found this out for the first time, I was like really amazed by how this Poisson process things work. All right, so here's a chart. Okay, this is, I believe, in context to the test net. Okay, so there is this much percentage of chance block will get mined in 1 minute. Okay, there is a, let's say, around 60, almost around 60% chance that a block will be mined every 10 minutes. So if you wait for 10 minutes, there is a 60% chance that a block will be mined on the test net. Okay, and if you wait for around, let's say, 55 minutes, then there is a 100% chance that a block will be mined. Okay, so this is like the ratio of the probability of block being found and the minutes that you have to wait. To make testing a bit more predictable, we need to have blocks mined more consistently. We already know that hashing power on the testnet will be less predictable because there is no economic incentive to mine on testnet. TBTC coins have no monetary value. As such, miners will come and go as people are testing new mining hardware and software. So generally on the mainnet, okay, the difficulty is very rarely adjusted abruptly, especially where we are right now, right? There are so many of ASICs that are dedicated to mining on the mainnet. There are so many professional companies now that are dedicated, multi-million-dollar companies that are dedicated, that have the entire infrastructure set up of hundreds and hundreds of ASICs that are mining on the mainnet, that it's very irrational for something like this to happen, right? So even if the difficulty is adjusted, it happens like in a very small proportion. It doesn't happen abruptly. But with testnet, that is not the case. At testnet, the difficulty at times might be adjusted abruptly, right? Because there is no incentive for mining on the testnet. So like when a lot of people are testing, they might start mining a lot of coins on the testnet, all right? So the difficulty might go up a little bit. And when there are no developers testing, or very few developers testing, then the difficulty might drop considerably abruptly. All right, so the fluctuation is much more high and the variance is much more high on the testnet as compared to the mainnet. Due to the unpredictability of hashing power and block times, there's a special rule that allows a block to be mined against the minimum difficulty of 1. and thus practically instantly on a GPU or ASIC if there hasn't been a block for 20 minutes. This rule gets invoked fairly regularly on testnet. In fact, I wrote the script to determine just how often. It turns out that nearly 200,000 blocks, nearly 12% of all blocks on testnet, have been mined at a difficulty of 1 after the 20-minute window has passed since the previous block. So this is the 20-minute exception that we were talking about. This rule is specific to the testnet. Okay, what happens is that if on testnet a block is not mined for 20 minutes, if a 20-minute time span passes on the testnet and no block has been mined, the difficulty level for the block, that the candidate block, goes down to 1, meaning a block will be mined instantly. So if for 20 minutes there are no blocks being mined, okay, then after 20 minutes almost instantly a block will be mined, as long as somebody is trying to mine it. Okay, because the purpose of testnet is that developers need to test it, and like if blocks are, if not a lot of people are mining, that there is a possibility that you might not find a block for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 60 minutes, right? On the mainnet we see this happens, right? On the mainnet this happens, that for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, or even 60 minutes you will not find a block, right? But that's a payment network, so maybe people can wait for 60 minutes to receive bitcoins, right? But on the testing network, you don't want such high variance. You don't want developers to wait for 60 minutes. Maybe a developer is testing something, testing a client or a feature, a use case where they want a block to be mined every 10 minutes or every 20 minutes at the most. They cannot afford to wait for 60 minutes, right? Their use case might be of no avail if they have to wait for 60 minutes on the testnet for a block to be mined. So what happens is that for 20 minutes, if no blocks are mined on the testnet, then the difficulty automatically reduces to 1, and then immediately or instantly a block is mined. So no 20 minutes, no 25 minutes or 30 minutes ideally would pass on the testnet except that a block is mined. Okay, if very few people are mining, they cannot find a block in 20 minutes, then all of a sudden the difficulty goes back to 1, and then instantly a block is mined. This is the 20-minute exception on the testnet. Okay, now how can this be exploited? We'll look into that further. It is worth noting that due to some leeway allowed around block timestamps, it's possible for an adversarial miner to set their timestamp 20 minutes into the future and mine a block at a difficulty of 1, but they'd only be able to do this at most 6 times before hitting the 2 hours in the future rule. I discuss block timestamp security in depth in this post. Okay, so it is possible on the testnet for a miner to put a timestamp which is 20 minutes in the future. Okay, so if a miner is mining a block, okay, they can put a timestamp which is 20 minutes in the future as compared to the timestamp of the previous block. Okay, so when the miner puts a timestamp which is 20 minutes in the future, what will happen? The difficulty will immediately go down to 1, and immediately they'll find a block. Okay, so like somebody can manipulate this particular leeway, that they are mining a block on the testnet, they put a timestamp which is 20 minutes in the future, and immediately the difficulty goes down to 1 and a block is mined. Okay, but however they can do this at the most 6 times, right? Because if you put the timestamp for 20 minutes in the future, you can do it once. You do it for the second block, it's 40 minutes. You do it for the third block, it's 60 minutes. You do it for the fourth block, 80 minutes, fifth block, 100 minutes, sixth block, 120 minutes. Okay, and we know that any block that has a timestamp which is more than 2 hours in the future is an invalid block, right? So there is a range for for a valid block, right? The lower bound is what? It's the MTP, the median time passed of the past 11 blocks, and the upper bound is 2 hours in the future, network adjusted time plus 2 hours, right? So 6 times in succession, somebody can exploit this. Like they can mine a block on the testnet and put a timestamp of 20 minutes in the future. So the difficulty becomes 1 and they immediately mine a block, and then they can do it 6 times. So they can mine 6 blocks like this by putting bogus timestamps and reducing the difficulty. What this happens is that this will create a block storm, right? Like 6 blocks will be mined in quick succession. Immediately 6 blocks will be mined with difficulty level 1. So this is how somebody can exploit this this particular leeway on the testnet, the 20-minute exception mark. Okay, this is one of the ways in which it can be exploited. There is another and a more severe way in which it can be exploited. We will look into the code. Let me see if we have a better access to the code. Yeah, so yeah, we can look at this code. Okay, so basically what is happening is that this is the gist of it. Sorry, this one. Okay, p block get time. So p block is your current block. Okay, your candidate block. You get time of that. So you find what is the time of the block that you're mining on the testnet. This is specific to the testnet. Okay. So you see the time of the current block that you're mining on the testnet. Okay. You have one piece of data. Now the second piece of data is p-index last. Okay. Get block time. So you get the block time of the previous block that has been mined. Okay. And then you get the POW target spacing, which is 10. Okay. So the target is 10 minutes that you are targeting, that a block should be mined every 10 minutes. Then you multiply it by 2, that's 20. All right. So you get the timestamp of the previous block. Okay. And then you add 20 minutes to it. Okay. And if that timestamp is lesser than the timestamp of the current block, it means that 20 minutes have passed and a block has not been mined. In that case, what will happen? The difficulty will return to 1. Okay. So this is the check that happens every time a miner is trying to mine a block and they put a timestamp in that block on the testnet. This is specific to the testnet, as it says right there. Special difficulty rule for testnet. Okay, yeah, special difficulty rule for the testnet. So this is only applicable to the testnet. When somebody is mining a block on testnet and they put a timestamp which is 20 minutes, in the future, this if clause gets triggered and the difficulty gets reduced to 1. So somebody can exploit this 6 times in a row till they are within their upper bound of 2 hours. After that, they cannot do it. But there's something even more severe than that, which we will hopefully look into. Is it in the PR? No, this is a video. Let me see, where is it? I'm just see if anything is there in the chat. Nothing.
Faisal,
Yeah.
In the chat, there is a you can find a PDF. So there is a visualization of how this time warp happens.
Right, great, fine. Right, we'll probably have time to go through it. We'll look into it, sure, for sure. Okay. This is the recent one, I believe. This is the PR basically. Yes, this is the PR. So a new test network with the goal to replace testnet 3. This network comes with small but important improvements of the consensus rules that should make it impractical to attack the network only using CPU mining. All right. So yeah, just let's read through this. It shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. It has a lot of important and relevant and interesting information. Testnet 3 has been running for 13 years now. Okay. So it's on block 2.5 million, right? 2.5 million. So you can imagine, ideally the testnet should work in simulation with the mainnet. All right. That's what the intention is. The testnet should emulate the behavior of the mainnet. So if the mainnet's height, I believe, is currently around 800,000 blocks. Okay. But the testnet's height is 2.5 million blocks. So you can understand, that how many times block storms have happened. The testnet 3 started 2 years after the mainnet. Despite that, the mainnet is at block number 800,000 and the testnet is at 2.5 million. And the block reward is down to 0.014 TBTC. So on the mainnet, we are currently at 3.125 BTC. But there are so many halvings that have happened on the testnet that currently the block reward is 0.014 for TBTC. That's testnet bitcoins. That is also a reason for us to switch to another testnet, right? Because even if you mine a block, you get only these many bitcoins, right? So maybe your use case needs you to have more bitcoins. You're testing something for which you need 50 bitcoins or 40 bitcoins or 30 bitcoins, testnet bitcoins, right? So if you're mining yourself, imagine how many blocks you'll have to mine to reach to 20, 25 or 30 bitcoins if you're getting just 0.014 TBTC, right, per block. So the block reward is so less that it will not meet a lot of use cases. If you can go and access these bitcoins from a faucet or can take it from a friend, it's different. But if you are planning to mine bitcoins on the testnet for a use case where you need 20 bitcoins or 25 bitcoins for testing some wallet or something, whatever, then you can imagine the number of blocks you'll have to mine on the testnet currently on testnet 3 to get to that figure. That is another reason why the testnet has been reset and we're transitioning to testnet 4. So mining is not doing a great job at distributing testnet coins anymore. The reason the block height is insanely high is due to a rather amusing edge case bug that causes the difficulty to regularly get reset to 1. Okay, we discussed why this What is this bug and why does the difficulty get set to 1? Okay, just to recap, whenever a block is not mined on the testnet for 20 minutes, immediately the testnet's difficulty goes down to 1 and it's mined instantly using a CPU or a GPU, as long as there's somebody who's mining there, which causes a bit of a havoc. If you want a deep dive, we've gone through this article, I believe. Testnet 3 is being actively used for scammy airdrops. Those of us who tend to be generous with our testnet coins are getting hounded by non-developers chasing cheap gains. As a result, TBTC is being actively bought and sold. One could argue that the fundamental principle of testnet coins having no value has broken. Okay, so like for the newbies, right, those who want to get into development or are interested in core, this is a very fundamental principle. Testnet coins should never have any value. Testnet coins should never have any value. The moment people start attesting value to testnet coins, the moment they start becoming valuable, okay, then the entire purpose is defeated, because you want testnet coins to be easily available for developers for testing purpose, right? If I am a developer and I want 50 testnet bitcoins to test something, I don't want to go in the market and I don't have to I don't want to spend money to buy it, right? I don't want people selling me one testnet bitcoin for $100, right? Developers will not spend obviously for that testing purpose. You want testnet coins to be cheap, easily and abundantly available, and it's a core principle that testnet coins should never carry any value. Okay, and previously, from what I'm aware, on testnet 2 etc., people started associating value to testnet coins, right? People started associating values to testnet coins, and that is why that testnet was aborted and we went to testnet 3. So it's a core fundamental that testnet coins should never carry any value. You should not have to spend to get those testnet coins. They should be freely and abundantly and easily available. Since then, the issue with block storms has been further demonstrated on testnet 3, when 3 years worth of blocks were mined in a few weeks while rendering the network practically unusable at the same time. Okay, so exploiting this 20-minute bug, okay, there was a time span in which blocks were 3 years were mined within a few weeks. Consensus of testnet 4 follows the same rules as the mainnet with the exception of 3 rules detailed below. Additionally, all soft forks that are active on mainnet as of May 2024 are enforced from Genesis. This rule was already previously implemented and active in testnet. Okay, so what is this 20-minute exception rule? We'll go through it again quickly. A block with a timestamp that is more than 20 minutes past the timestamp of the previous block must have a minimum difficulty of 1, the network's minimum difficulty, instead of whatever the actual difficulty level currently is. This applies to all blocks in a difficulty period except for the first block. This means the blocks must change their field from the actual difficulty level to the minimum difficulty level. So there's an n bits field, okay? There's an n bits field in the blocks which determine, I believe it's in the block header, that determine the difficulty for mining that block. Okay, so that n bits field is reset to 1 every time there is a block which is not found on the testnet for 20 minutes. Okay, this n bits field goes down to 1, which means the difficulty goes down to 1 and a block is mined instantly. How do we fix it? Okay, how does this PR propose to fix this issue on the testnet? The work required for a new difficulty period is calculated as a multiplication factor to the difficulty of the previous period, but no less than 1/4 and no more than 4x. Okay, so just in case if somebody is not aware, we already know and we've discussed that the difficulty is adjusted every 2016 blocks, right? On the mainnet as well as the testnet, but the difficulty cannot be adjusted by a factor of more than 1/4 or 4x, right? So the difficulty cannot be increased by more than 4x and it cannot be reduced by more than 0.25x, that is 1/4. Okay, so that is a ratio. Even if 90% of the hash rate vanishes overnight, it doesn't mean that the difficulty will reduce by 1/9. No, it'll still reduce by 1/4. So it'll take multiple epochs for the difficulty to come back to sustainable levels, such that on an average a block is mined every 10 minutes. Okay, so the difficulty period is adjusted every 2016, but the difficulty can only be increased after every 2016 blocks by 4x, or it can be reduced by 1/4. Not more than 4x can it be increased, and not less than 1/4 can it be reduced. Both on mainnet and the testnet. On mainnet and testnet, this factor is applied to the n bits value of the last block. Block storms. Okay, so for the difficulty adjustment, there is an n bits field. Okay, so the last block in a difficulty adjustment period of 2016 blocks, you go to that last block, you check the n bits field, and based on that, you determine whether the difficulty has to be maintained or it has to be increased or it has to be decreased, by what value it has to be increased, by what values it has to be decreased, is determined based on the n bits field of the last block of a difficulty adjustment time epoch. Block storms happen organically whenever the 20-minute exception is applied to a difficulty period's last block, setting its n bits value to 1. Okay. So if the last block in the difficulty adjustment time epoch, that's block number 2016, right? Block number 2016 of a difficulty period. Okay, if we put a timestamp of 20 minutes in the future, what will happen? The n bits field of the final block of that difficulty adjustment period will become 1. Okay, will become 1. And after that, what will happen? That will be the difficulty of the next time epoch as well. All right, so the difficulty adjustment algorithm will see that the difficulty of the previous epoch was 1. So at the most, what it'll do is it'll increase it to 4, not more than that. So if somebody manipulates the timestamps and ensures that the final block that was mined on the testnet in a difficulty adjustment period, okay, if they manipulate the timestamp to 20 minutes in the future, what will happen is that the n bits field of the final block of a difficulty adjustment period on the testnet will be set to 1. And the difficulty adjustment algorithm will be deceived into believing that the network difficulty currently is 1 and it can only increase it by a factor of 4. So the difficulty at the most will be increased to 4, not more than that. All right. And then what will happen? What will happen is that people will be able to mine blocks very quickly at very quick succession, because if the difficulty is 1, then the difficulty adjustment algorithm will reduce the difficulty level exponentially and the blocks will be mined in quick succession. And then what will happen? We saw an example that people will be able to mine blocks that should ideally have been mined in 3 years within a few weeks. And instead of having 800,000 blocks on the testnet, currently we have 2.5 million blocks, which is a consequence of exploiting a bug like this. So block storms happen organically whenever the 20-minute exception is applied to a difficulty period's last block, setting its n bits value to 1. The difficulty adjustment rules then limit the subsequent difficulty to a value 1, the minimum 4. Okay, it cannot go above 4. Blocks will be generated rapidly, okay, in the subsequent low difficulty periods while the difficulty climbs back to an adequate range. So it will take some time for some epochs. In fact, it will take some difficulty adjustment epochs for the difficulty to come back to normal, such that a block on an average is mined every 10 minutes. Okay. An arbitrarily large number of blocks can be generated quickly by repeatedly using the 20-minute exception on every last block of difficulty periods, right? So all you have to do is that you find the last block of every difficulty adjustment period, just put a bogus timestamp of 20 minutes in the future, which a valid timestamp, and the difficulty for the last block, which is the n bits value for the last block, will be set to 1, and the network's difficulty will be reduced drastically and you'll be able to mine a lot of blocks in quick succession. Then again, in the next difficulty epoch, you do the same thing. What you did with 2016 block, you do it with 4032 block, so on and so forth. So the last block of every difficulty adjustment period, you go there and put a bogus timestamp of 20 minutes in the future, and you deceive the difficulty adjustment algorithm, and you reduce the difficulty of the testnet, and you can mine lots and lots of blocks. So you can mine blocks that should have been mined in years within weeks. An arbitrarily large number of blocks can be generated quickly by repeatedly using the 20-minute exception on every last block of difficulty periods. The block storm is then bounded only by minor hash rate. The need for last blocks to have a timestamp 20 minutes after the second to last block, the median time pass end time rule, and the requirement that blocks can't be more than 2 hours in the future. Overall, a sustained attack would eventually be limited to a maximum cadence of 1 block per second. All right. So should we read everything? I don't think we should read everything. Okay, so let's just go to the gist of it. How is this being fixed? Let me see if I can find out how is this being fixed. These suggestions I believe have been made recently. This would allow the lower difficulty. So the mitigation, I think this is where the solution is mentioned. How do we circumvent, how do we combat this bug that is being exploited? The mitigation consists of adding a new rule to no longer apply the adjustment factor to the last block of the previous difficulty period when its difficulty is 1. In that case, blocks are traversed in reverse order until the block is found with a higher difficulty. Only if all blocks of the previous period have a difficulty of 1, including its first block difficulty 1, is used. So what is the mitigation? you look at the last block of a difficulty adjustment period, right? That could be block number 2016 or 4023. All right. So you take the block height or you modulo it with 2016. If the modulo is 0, it means the block is the final block in that difficulty adjustment period. You look at its n bits. If its n bits value is 1, you don't take that into consideration to adjust the difficulty. Okay, you go back, you go to 2015 block, you go to 2014 block, you go to 2013 block, you keep on traversing backwards till you reach a block where the network, where the difficulty is a rational value, is an actual value. Okay, so if somebody puts a bogus timestamp in the last block and the n bits is 1, you don't take that into consideration. Okay, I'll read this is the most important part. The mitigation consists of adding a new rule to no longer apply the adjustment factor to the last block of the previous difficulty period when its difficulty is 1. Okay, so up till now, the last block, the sole criteria was that you looked at the n bits field of the last block and you saw the difficulty of the last block, based on which you adjust the difficulty for the subsequent time epoch. But now when you look at the difficulty of the last block, if it's 1, then there is a high possibility that the timestamp has been manipulated and a bogus timestamp has been entered. So you overlook it. You traverse back to the previous block. If that is 1, then you traverse back to the previous block. If that is 1, you keep traversing back till you reach a block where the difficulty is a rational value, and you use that difficulty to calculate the difficulty for the next time epoch, right? So that we avoid the situation where block storms happen. This is as a whole the mitigation. All right. Just to summarize everything, right? We know what the testnet is. Testnet is a simulation of the mainnet. On an average, we want a block to be mined on the testnet every 10 minutes. Okay, but because the hash rate on the testnet varies a lot, it fluctuates a lot. The variance is very high as compared to the mainnet. So it might happen that at times when very few developers are mining blocks on the testnet, then the testnet, like, you might not find the block for a long period of time on the testnet. On the mainnet, maybe that's tolerable because eventually it's a settlement layer. You might want to wait for 50 minutes, or you might be okay for waiting for 50 to 60 minutes to receive your bitcoins, right? But on the testnet, if you're a developer, if you're testing something and you're not finding a block for 60 minutes, 50 minutes, your purpose of having a testnet or a testing environment is defeated. So you want blocks to be mined at quick successions, 10 minutes or at the most 20 minutes. And that is why there is this difficulty rule. We even looked at the code of that for every 20 minutes, if 20 minutes pass on the testnet and we don't find a block, then the difficulty goes down to 1 and instantly we find a block, to ensure that if a developer is testing, then every 20 minutes, come what may, a block should be mined so that the testing environment's purpose is served. Now, some people were exploiting, or it's possible to exploit that bug by putting bogus timestamps and mining blocks in quick succession. You can mine 6 blocks in quick succession within a time difficulty adjustment time epoch. Even worse, you can manipulate the timestamp of the final block in a difficulty adjustment period and set its n bits to 1, thereby deceiving the difficulty adjustment algorithm and exponentially reducing the difficulty of the subsequent difficulty adjustment period, okay, which was being done. And now the mitigation is that the algorithm will look at the n bits of the final block in a difficulty adjustment period. If it's 1, it'll overlook it. It'll keep traversing back till it finds a block where the n bits is a rational, is a relevant value, and it'll take that into consideration, and on the basis of that, it'll adjust the difficulty adjustment algorithm. The difficulty will go up or down depending on the final block, which has an n bits value, which is not 1 and which is a rational and a relevant value. That's the mitigation that has been done in testnet 4 to ensure that block storms do not happen anymore. That is the gist of this PR. Okay, this PR also talks about time warp attack and how it's fixed. Okay, but I don't think time will permit us to go into this. So we had covered time warp attack and the great consensus soft fork, which is proposed by Matt Corello, I believe in 296. Okay, so whoever wants to go through it can go to Bitshala's YouTube channel and listen to this session number 296, like the session that we did on newsletter 296. And you'll also find the notes over there. I have added my notes, what time warp attack is with an example, and how it can be mitigated, and what is the great consensus cleanup soft fork. We'll not be able to cover that, but this BIP also proposes a solution for that. So we'll just go through the questions. Okay. The questions. So what they have done is that they have collected 3 or 4 important questions that the participants who are participating in this review club came up with, and their answers in brief. So we'll just go through it. The first question is, aside from the consensus changes, what differences do you see between testnet 4 and testnet 3, particularly chain params? The answer is the deployment heights of pass or soft forks are all set to 1, which means they're active from the beginning. Testnet 4 also uses a different port 48333 and a message start, and it has a new Genesis block message. So there are 3 things that they have mentioned. Firstly, generally whenever soft fork happens, right, there is a block height at which soft fork happens. Okay, and all the blocks which precede that block height, okay, they are not liable to comply with that soft fork per se. Okay, so if you look at the main net, the SegWit soft fork, for instance, happened at a certain block. Let's assume that the SegWit soft fork happened at block N. So all the transactions that are included before block N, they will not contain the attributes of a SegWit transaction, right? They will not have their witness data split from them. So if I tell you that, let's assume the SegWit soft fork happened at block 500,000, let's assume. So all the transactions that are included in blocks before 500,000, the witness data will be a part of the transaction itself, and all the transactions that are included, or most of the transactions that are included in block post block height 500,000, they will be SegWit transactions. Okay, so generally when soft forks happen, those soft forks are associated or affiliated with a block index, so that you can determine that all the data before this block index was not a part of the soft fork, and the rules of these soft fork do not apply to this data. So because we're starting in the testnet from scratch, so all the soft forks that happened in the past 13 years that were a part of testnet 3 apply to the Genesis block. Okay, apply to the Genesis block. So for testnet 4, all the soft forks that happened while testnet 3 was being used, their index height will be 1. Okay, index height will be 1 because all the soft forks that were applicable for testnet 3 over the past 13 years, all of them are applicable from the Genesis block of testnet 1. Okay, so the deployment heights of past soft forks are all set to 1 because testnet 4 starts with all those soft forks being applicable to it, which means they're active from the beginning. The second difference is that testnet 4 also uses a different port. So this is the port that you need to connect to if you are working with the testnet. It's 48333, right? So if you're giving a RPC call to connect to the testnet, this is the port that you will have to connect to. And it has a new Genesis block message. I'm not sure if I can see what that message is, but it's a very interesting messaging. Testnet 1, can anybody take a shot at what? Firstly, if can anybody take a shot at what is included, what message is included in the Genesis block of the mainnet? Like the mainnet has a very popular message in its Genesis block in the op return.
Chancellor on the brink of bailout.
Right. Great. And that same message is in the Genesis block of testnet 1. That same message is in the Genesis block of testnet 2. That same message is in the Genesis block of testnet 3. But in testnet 4, they don't have this message. They have added another message. I can't remember. I think they've added the block hash. They have added the hash of the block index of the main net that coincides with testnet 4. Okay, so when testnet 4 became active, they looked at the block hash of the main net. The block that was mined, the block index that coincided with the advent of testnet 4, they looked at its block hash from the mainnet and they added it. So it's like a proof that testnet 4 started at this block height of the mainnet. So they've made this change. Now they have discontinued that ritual of adding that same op return message. So these are 3 major differences. The second is, how does a 20-minute exception rule work in testnet 3? How does this lead to the block storm bug? We've talked about that in detail. Okay, let's just read through it and skim through it quickly. If a new block's timestamp is more than 20 minutes ahead of the previous block's timestamp, it is allowed to have minimum proof of difficulty. The next block is subject to the real difficulty again, unless it too falls under the 20-minute exception rule. This exception is made to enable the chain to make progress in an environment of highly variable hash rate due to a bug in the get next work required implementation. the difficulty is actually reset instead of temporarily lowered for just one block when the last block of a difficulty period is a min difficulty block. The next question is, why was the time warp fix included in the PR? How does the time warp fix work? So a time warp attack allows an attacker to significantly alter the block production rate. So it makes sense to fix this alongside the min difficulty bug. Since it is also part of the consensus cleanup soft fork, testnet running the fix in testnet 4 first provides useful early feedback. This PR fixes the time warp bug by checking that the first block of a new difficulty epoch is not earlier than 2 hours before the last block of the previous epoch. So there is this very popular bug called the time warp bug or the time warp attack, all right? So any miner that has 51% of the hash rate can pull off this time warp attack. It's a very popular attack that's being discussed about. And a mitigation has been proposed in a great consensus of fork, which is proposed by Matt Corello. You'll find it on the internet if you go and Google the great consensus cleanup by Matt Corello. We've also talked about it in some detail in 296, that 296. The logic being that because this 20-minute bug that we were talking about has to do with timestamps, has to do with manipulating timestamps, and the time warp attack also has to do with manipulating timestamps. So when they decided to fix one for testnet 3, they also decided to fix the other bug for testnet 3. What is that time warp attack? Then you can go and refer to our newsletter number 296. Oh, here it is. What is the message in the Genesis block? Testnet 3 as well as other nets preceding testnet 4 have the same well-known Genesis block message. Okay, this is the message. This is the message in the Genesis block of the main net and of the Genesis block of testnet 1, 2, and 3, I believe. The times 03 Jan 209 chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. Testnet 4 is the first network to have its own Genesis block message, which includes the hash of a recent mainnet block. Okay, currently, so this is the hash of that block to provide strong guarantees that no pre-mining on this testnet 4 chain occurred before this mainnet block was mined. All right, so this is what we had to cover in this PR. Okay, we gave more time to it than we generally do because there were no news articles. We talked about what testnet 4 is, what testnet is, what the 20-minute bug is, how the 20-minute bug can be exploited, and how the 20-minute bug has been mitigated. We don't have a lot to cover other than these two code and documentation changes, which should not take more than 5 to 10 minutes. So any questions, any thoughts, anything anybody would like to say or ask about this specific PR verbally or in chat before we move forward? Thanks for showing up, Rishabh. Right. Coding piece, typing something. I will let you complete. In the meantime, we can move forward and then come back to your question. Somebody wants to say something. I think it's Bala.
Yeah. So, like, are there any faucets that are up from where we can get these coins? How do we access coins?
Yes, somebody shared with me. I have not used them, but somebody shared a few links with me. So if you want, I will share the link with you as well later on. I have it in my phone. Somebody shared it with me on Signal, so I'll share them with you. All right, so let's move forward. We'll come back to the chat section to see what questions people have. New releases and release candidates for popular Bitcoin infrastructure projects. Please consider upgrading to new releases or helping to test release candidates. Bitcoin Core 26.2 is a maintenance version of Bitcoin Core's older release series. Anyone on 26.1 or earlier who is unable or unwilling to upgrade to the latest release 27.1 is encouraged to upgrade to this maintenance release. So a new maintenance version or a new maintenance release of Bitcoin Core is available 26.2. LND version 0.18.2 beta is a minor release to fix a bug affecting users of older versions of BTCD backend. Okay, so the new beta version of LND is available, and I think we've talked about this bug, BTCD. I believe this has to do with the fact that BTCD considers negative version numbers, negative transaction version numbers to be valid, which most other implementations of Bitcoin do not, and that is why there might be a lapse in communication between different implementations, and now BTCD has fixed it. And even BTCD, I believe, considers only unsigned values of version numbers, meaning only positive version numbers. I believe this has to do with that, because we've talked about this in at least one or two preceding sessions about this bug. So I believe this has to do with it. All right. So we have two code and documentation changes, which will not take a lot of time. Rust Bitcoin. The first has to do with Rust Bitcoin. We don't have anything about to talk about Bitcoin Core tonight. Just one. I think both of these have to do with Rust Bitcoin. BDK is also Rust, if I'm not wrong. Rust Bitcoin PR number 2949 adds a new method is standard operator to validate operator outputs against current standardist rules, allowing programmers to test whether operator data exceeds the 80 byte maximum size enforced by Bitcoin Core. Programmers who aren't worried about exceeding the current default Bitcoin Core limit can continue to use Rust Bitcoin's existing is operator function. So in Bitcoin Core, there is a limit of for the amount of data that you can put in op return. It's 80 bytes. Okay, and the text suggests that this limit was not being abided by in Rust Bitcoin, but now Rust Bitcoin adds a new method to validate to check whether the amount of data that is entered in the op return of a Bitcoin transaction does not exceed 80 bytes. Okay, because I believe this is a standardness rule for op return in Bitcoin Core. So maybe your Bitcoin Core node will consider a transaction which has an op return data of more than 80 bytes to be not standard. Okay, so for better communication between different clients Bitcoin, Rust Bitcoin will now add a feature where you can check and ensure that the op return data is not more than 80 bytes. Let us see. What is not this? Let us see the PR. This is Rust Bitcoin, by the way, not Bitcoin Core. Yeah, so it checks is op return. Can we see where exactly that check is performed? Yeah, ADC. I think it is this. Yeah, it checks. So if the arbitrary data that you've put in the op return is greater than 80 bytes, this is where the check is performed. So you can check if you don't want to relay transactions with the greater op return data than 80 bytes, then this is where the check is performed. Checks whether a script is trivially known to have where is it? Check if this is an op return that obeys Bitcoin Core standardist policies. So any Bitcoin transaction that has data exceeding 80 bytes in op return will be considered as a non-standard transaction by all nodes running Bitcoin Core. So now you perform a validation check to ensure that the transaction that your Bitcoin Rust node is relaying is compatible and is standard in accordance with Bitcoin Core's standardness. So that is the new feature that has been added to Rust Bitcoin 2949. That's the PR number. The final one is BDK PR number 1487. Introduces support for custom input and output sorting functions by adding a custom variant to the TX ordering enum to enhance flexibility in transaction construction. Explicit BIP69 support is removed because it may not provide the desired privacy due to its low adoption rate. Newsletter number 19 and 151, but users can still create BIP69 compliant transactions by implementing appropriate custom sorting. So basically, like to ensure privacy, what happens is that I believe this BIP69, what this does is that it proposes an algorithm to lexicographically arrange inputs and outputs or in a Bitcoin transaction. Okay, so let's say there are different clients of Bitcoin and there are different wallets of Bitcoin that use different algorithms to arrange, okay, order inputs and outputs in a transaction that leaks out information. Okay, so let's assume there's a specific client of Bitcoin which uses a specific algorithm to arrange the inputs of a transaction and the outputs of a transaction. Okay, then somebody who is overlooking, somebody who is monitoring the blockchain by looking at the order in which inputs and outputs are arranged in a Bitcoin transaction, they can figure out what what client the user is using. Okay, so if there's a certain wallet, for instance, that uses a certain algorithm to arrange the inputs in a transaction and a certain algorithm to arrange the outputs in a transaction, okay, then by looking at that transaction on the blockchain, you can figure out that, hey, the user of this transaction is using a specific wallet or a specific client. You don't want that to happen, right? So generally, I believe BIP61 was proposed, which used a specific algorithm of lexicographically arranging inputs and outputs, so that and the idea or the aim was that all clients and all wallets should comply with BIP69, so that no matter what client you're using, no matter what wallet you're using, all Bitcoin transactions on the blockchain should use the same algorithm to arrange their inputs and their outputs. So merely by looking at the order of the inputs and the outputs, nobody should be able to guess what client you're using or what hardware wallet you're using, because everybody is using the same algorithm to arrange the inputs and the outputs. But I believe BIP61 did not get a lot of acceptance. A lot of wallets and a lot of clients that create transactions did not comply with BIP69, and there were only very few wallets that gave support to BIP69. What was happening is that due to this, in fact, this like backfired, because only a few wallets are using BIP69, and BIP69 has a known algorithm through which it is arranging the inputs and the outputs. The moment you see any transaction where inputs and outputs resemble that algorithm, you immediately know that this transaction has been created by a client that supports BIP69. So instead of enhancing the privacy, what happened is that it backfired, and it was very easy to detect that, hey, this transaction inputs and outputs in this transaction are arranged in a lexicographical order, which means this transaction has been created by a client which complies with BIP69, and there are ABCD, only a handful of clients which comply with BIP69. So now what has happened is that there's a transaction ordering mechanism, a custom transaction ordering mechanism that's been introduced in BDK. So all clients that are built on top of BDK can come up with their own custom mechanism or algorithm based on which they can create their own mechanism of sorting the transactions, right? So there's flexibility. Like if there are a lot of custom algorithms that are being used to arrange transactions, inputs and outputs in a transaction, it makes it very difficult to predict what client the user is using or what hardware wallet the user is using. So to create more randomness and more different algorithms and more like to break that uniformity in transaction ordering, now you can create your own. You can create your own custom algorithms, I believe, to order the inputs and outputs of a transaction. That is what this PR talks about. This is specific to BDK. So these were the two code and documentation changes, two release candidates, and one core review club that we went through. That is all I had to share from my end. I will now stop sharing my screen. If anybody has any questions, any queries, there is something in the chat. Right. Shayan says need to drop off. Right, sure. So yeah. Why is the block reward so low in testnet? Isn't the block reward determined by the number of years pass? No, the block reward is determined based on the block height. It is based on the block height. See, Bitcoin's network does not understand your and my time, right? The Bitcoin network doesn't know the Januaries and the Februaries, and the Bitcoin network does not know whether it's 12 o'clock in the night or 5 o'clock in the night. The Bitcoin network recognizes and does things based on the block height. So one difficulty adjustment period happens after 2016 blocks. It's not after 2 weeks, right? On an average, if a block is mined every 10 minutes, then those 2016 blocks will coincide with 2 weeks, okay? But the Bitcoin network does not adjust its difficulty every 2 weeks. It adjusts its difficulty every 2016 blocks. If 2016 blocks are mined in 1 week, it'll adjust its difficulty in 1 week. If 2016 blocks are mined in 10 weeks, it'll adjust its difficulty after 10 weeks. All right. So the difficulty adjustment and the halving happens in accordance with the block index. It's not necessary that it'll happen in 4 years. It happens in accordance with the block index. All right. And if you're mining blocks in quick succession, then those 20616 blocks that should ideally have been mined in 2 weeks. If you are exploiting the 20-minute bug that we just talked about, then maybe you can mine 2016 blocks instead of 2 weeks within a few hours. So after a few hours, again, 2016 blocks will pass by, and that is what has happened. So ideally, the testnet should have had 8,000 blocks, 800,000 blocks okay, like the mainnet, but we have 2.5 million blocks by exploiting that 20-minute bug that we just talked about. And after every certain block height index, I can't right now recall the figure. It's not 4 years, okay? It's not 4 years at all. It has nothing to do with our Gregorian calendar or lunar calendar. It has to do with the block height. So if you're mining blocks in quick succession, the halvings will happen quickly. The halvings will not wait for 4 years, they'll happen quickly. So a lot of halvings have happened. Okay, on the mainnet we're at 3.125, but at testnet we went to 3.125, and then we have that, and now we've reached a point where it is 0.014 BTC. So I hope that answers that first question. Thanks, but I'm still confused with the line that block reward is halved every 4 years given on Google. No, that's incorrect. It has nothing to do with years. It has to do with block heights. If a block is mined on an average every 10 minutes, then the halving will happen in 4 years. Okay, because on the mainnet, the fluctuation is not very high, the variance is not very high. Okay, on the mainnet the variance is not very high, as you talked about. So on an average you will find that a block is mined in 10 minutes. Okay, the variance is very little, the fluctuation is very little on the mainnet. That's not the case on the testnet. On the testnet the fluctuation is very high, and that is why the blocks are mined in quick succession, and that is why we've had a lot of halvings in the past 13 years. In 13 years we've had so many halvings on the testnet that now we've reached 0.014 BTC. So it has nothing to do with 4 years. It should happen in 4 years, and it'll happen ideally in 4 years on the mainnet, but on testnet you can't predict, because to manipulate the difficulty on the testnet is very easy, and people have manipulated it. Okay, what else? Checks the first message. I think this is what you're talking about. Because of the bug that resets the difficulty to 1. So a lot of blocks can be mined in short time. Yes. There are 2 ways to exploit this bug, 0xFA. The first is that you can exploit in the middle of a difficulty epoch by manipulating, by putting bogus timestamps of 20 minutes in succession, but that will only lead to 6 blocks in a row. Okay, because once you mine 6 blocks at a difficulty level of 1, you reach the timestamp of 2 hours, right? And after 2 hours, any block that you mine that has a timestamp of 2 hours in the future will be considered invalid. But how you can majorly exploit this bug is by specifically attacking the last block in a difficulty adjustment period. If you specifically attack the last block, you add a timestamp which is 20 minutes in the future, then the n bits value in the last block goes to 1. And when that happens, the entire next epoch of 2016 blocks, the difficulty reduces drastically. So there are 2 ways to exploit it, and we've covered both of them in the session. What else? I will look at it later. Oxford, this link, what is this? Let me see. Open link. What is this link about? Future and Bitcoin testnet. Yeah, I think this is they've moved now, right? The Bitcoin mailing list. Yes, they've been talking about it.
Yes, for the question from Colvin.
Right. I kind of skimmed over it. Yeah, Luke, Jim Lop, yeah. This was a couple of months ago, I believe. Jameson Lop was testing something, and he was a lot of people were talking about it on Twitter as well. Right. Yeah, fine. Thanks for sharing. I'll go through it as well. Great session. Thanks a lot. All right. I think nothing else to share. All right, cool. Nothing else to share, nothing else to say. So we're done from my end. If no other questions, then good night from my end.